Alright guys, so welcome to week 6. Last week we had an introduction to conic sections. So what is a conic section? A conic section is literally just when you have a plane intersecting a cone. Now depending on how that plane intersects that cone, you're going to be given 4 different types of shape. You're either going to get a circle, an ellipse, a parabola, or a hyperbola. The conic sections. So the conic section that we're going to concentrate on first is the parabola. Now the main reason probably we're starting with the parabola is because you already have experience with parabolas. So we're going to try to understand further what this shape gives us. What information can we pull from a parabola? So let's start with a little quick review. Now, what is a parabola? If you guys remember, a parabola is just the graph of a quadratic equation. Now, a quadratic equation is anything in the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, there are 2 different graphs that you guys got when you guys graph something in those forms. You either had it facing up or down. Now, how do we know whether it's facing up or down? Well, if your a is greater than 0, aka it's positive, that means that your parabola is going to be facing up. And I'm assuming if you guys didn't remember, as soon as you saw that shape, that's something that you guys graphed before. You guys are like, okay, I remember, it's coming back. So yeah, so if you graph something in the form, your a is positive, it's in that form, you're going to have something, a parabola facing upward, like an upward opening U. Now, how do we know if it's facing down? Well, if you look at our equations, if that a is less than 0, aka it is negative, that means that your parabola is going to be facing down. So that is what you guys spent, I believe, at the end of first semester doing, and I believe in a little bit of second semester as well. So you guys are familiar with quadratics. We're going to dive in deeper. We're going to take a break from this and kind of just start from the beginning. A definition of what is a parabola. A parabola is the set of all points such that each point is equidistant to a fixed point called the focus and a line called a directrix. Now, that might be pretty hard to kind of visualize. So let me do a picture for you that way you guys could understand that a little bit better. So you are going to have a fixed point. That fixed point is going to be called a focus. So that is my fixed point. It doesn't move. That's my focus. And then you're going to have a line. Now this line is going to be a horizontal line for us. We're going to call that line a directrix. Now the parabola, and again, we already know what a parabola is. It's that little U shape. Is the set of all points that is equidistant from this focus to that directrix. So if I were to look at this distance from the focus to the directrix, the middle point, the point that is equidistant from both ends, that is my parabola. Now that ain't the only point that's equidistant. If I go a little bit to the left, the distance here and the same distance, if it were the same distance to that directrix, would roughly be right about there. And if I keep going left, if I look at the distance from here, from my focus to that point, and that point to the directrix, and those are exactly the same, that would be another set. That would be my parabola. You can see what's happening here. As I draw these points, you can see that the parabola is actually the set of points that is equidistant to the focus in the directrix. So if you choose any of these points, let's say we choose a point way up here. If I choose a point over here, that parabola has a focus. The distance from the focus to that parabola is the exact same distance from that parabola to the directrix. These 2 distances are exactly the same. Of course, this is drawn to scale, so you can see that this one might seem a little bit larger, but if we have a parabola, we draw it correctly, we graph it correctly, you're going to get the exact same thing. Now, you might be asking, well, how do I get an upward facing or a downward facing parabola? I already know how I get upwards because all I need is a focus on top of my directrix. Well, let's just flip those and see what happens. So let's say I have my focus, my focus point that doesn't move. And I have a horizontal directrix. Now, again, remember, the parabola is the set of points that are equidistant to the focus and the directrix. So if this is my total distance from the focus to the directrix, my parabola point would be right in the middle because they would be equidistant. If I go a little bit left, the distance here would be equal to this distance, so you can see that it's kind of taking shape. And what do I end up with? I end up with a parabola facing downward. So keep in mind that while we're learning this new this new take on parabolas. If you ever have a focus that's on top of the directrix, you're going to have a upward facing parabola. If you have the directrix on top or above the focus, then you're going to have a downward facing parabola. Now let's look about left and right. Let's say I have my focus pointed right over there. And I have a directrix this time not going horizontal, but I'm having it go vertical. Now remember that, that's an F by the way, that the parabola is the set of points that's equidistant between the directrix and the focus. So if this was my distance, the point right in the middle that's equidistant would be right over there. I go a little bit left, that distance and that distance the same. The point would have to be right here for that distance and that distance to be the same. Notice we have a parabola, but this time it's opening to the right. So let's ignore this here and let's put a right there because I got a little ahead of myself on our notes. So whenever you have a parabola that's opening, so see how it's kind of opening to the right, we're going to have our vertical directrix and our focus to the right of that directrix. Now let's change this one and go left. I think you can see where we're going with this, right? Now what's going to happen is I'm going to have my focus first, and then I'm going to have my directrix, my vertical directrix to the right. And again, your parabola is the equidistance. It's the one right in the middle of those, facing the other way. Now, these are the four that we are going to focus on. You could have a sideways opening parabola. That is when you have a directrix that's not vertical or horizontal. It would be something like slanted with a focus just like that. And then that means your parabola would go something like that. But these gets way too complicated. That's something that you guys will maybe cover later on. But right now, again, I wouldn't even worry about it. Just worry about, okay, focus on understanding what happens when my directrix is horizontal, what happens when it's vertical. If my focus is up or below or right, how in the world is that my parabola gonna look like? So that's what we're doing first. My first thing is, okay, do these make sure that you guys understand which way it's facing? So we're even going to start simpler than that. I want you just to be able to look at an equation and know whether it's facing up, down, left, or right. Now, in order to know that, you need to know the general equations. Now, I gave you a generic one that you covered at the beginning. I want you guys to know this new general equation. Y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k, and x equals y minus k squared plus h. Now, let's kind of go slowly by this. You know if it's facing up or down if you have something in the form y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, where a can be anything but 0, so a cannot be 0, hk can be any number. So pretty much, if you ever arrive to an equation and you have a y and an x, and only one of them is getting squared, and the x is getting squared, do you see how the x is getting squared along with the h here? If your x is getting squared and your y isn't, you have a parabola. It's either opening up or it's opening down. Now, we know this already. How do we know if it's facing up? It's facing up if your a is greater than 0, aka if it's positive. That means you're going to have an upward facing parabola. Now, if that a is negative, that means that your parabola is going to be facing down. So, that's pretty much how you know if it's opening up or down. Let's talk a little bit about right and left. Now, if you have something in the form x equals y minus k squared plus h, now I forgot my a there, so make sure you write an a. If you have something in that form, aka again, just like I told you before over here, if you have an x and a y, and only one of them is getting squared, do you see how here the y is getting squared but the x is not? Then you have a parabola. Now, if your y is the one getting squared, that means it's going left or right. Now, how do we know if it's going which direction? Well, if your a is greater than 0, that means if it's positive, that means it's going right. The way I like to think about it is, okay, if a is positive, where's the positive direction on a graph? The positive direction is pointing to the right, so it would be facing to the right or opening to the right. Now, what happens if you have an x and a y, and the y is the one that's only getting squared. If your a is less than 0, negative, that means you're going to the left. That means you're going to be opening to the left. And then again, so these are pretty much the 4 things that you need to know, and I would be absolutely happy. I want you to be able to look at an equation. I want you to look at the x and the y. I want you to be able to recognize, hey, which one is getting squared? Are my x's getting squared or my y's? If your x's are getting squared, that means you have an up or a down. Now, to know whether it's going up or down, you need to know if the a is positive or negative. That means the number in front of the x. If it's positive, is up. If it's negative, is down. Now, if you see your y getting squared, that means that you're facing left or right. If your a is positive, that means the number in front of the y. Remember the y here. If it's positive, that means it's going to the right. And if it's negative, that means you're going to be going to the left. Forgot my T there. All right, so let's do some example problems of exactly problems you're going to be asked to do for your guys' homework. So, I have these 4 problems. Now, remember what you're looking for, the general form. You're either looking for y equals ax minus h squared plus k, or you're looking for x is equal to a y minus k squared plus h. Now, I think I got a little ahead of myself. I should explain a little bit further. Do not worry about the h and the k. That is the vertex. That's what the next video is covering. All I want you to worry about, again, is focusing on, is it going up, down, left, or right? What you need to know is, okay, which one is getting squared? Okay, so let's just start with number 1. Now, notice that none of these have, my x is not within parentheses. Now, what I like to do to help me out, whenever I don't see parentheses, kind of like, see how these ones are really obvious, there's parentheses around the x's and y's? I like to put parentheses around my x. And then I just go from there. And I ask myself, okay, the directions here are asking me, is it facing up, down, left, or right? Now, what is getting squared in this situation? Is your y getting squared? Nope. Is your x getting squared? Yes. See how your x is getting squared? Now, remember your notes. Does that mean I'm going up, down, or left, or right? Now, remember, when your x is getting squared, it's going up or down. Now, is your a positive or negative? Depends on whether it's going up or down. So, x squared, that means I'm going up or down. Now, is your a, the number in front of that x, positive or negative? It's negative. So that means I'm going to be going down. That means that this parabola would be facing down. All right, let's look at this one. You have an x, you have a y. What is getting squared? Your y's. That means you're going left or right. Now, what is your a? Now notice that your a is in front of the y squared. It is positive. That means it's going to go to the positive direction. It's going to go to the right. Okay? Let's look at this problem. Notice you have all this junk of stuff. Now again, when you're just focusing on going up, down, left, or right, just focus on the variables. Is your y getting squared? No. Is your x getting squared? Yes. That means it's going up or down. Now look for the number in front of the h. It is 1/3. Now remember, it doesn't matter if it's a fraction, just whether it's positive or negative. That's positive, so it's going to go in the positive direction, which is up. Now a little tricky, because if we look at this problem, notice you have x's, and again, ignore this. I already stretched that out. There's nothing significant. It's nothing. So we have an x, we have a y. Which one is getting squared? There's nothing there, but there is a y getting squared. If the y is getting squared, it's going left or right. Now, before we go any further, keep in mind that when you figured out your general equations, whether it's going left or right, what was by itself? Your x and your y. So before you could go any further, you have to get x by itself. If this is your square, if you know your y is getting squared, move everything to the other side. Now, who cares whether this is in parentheses and getting squared? All you want to do is move everything to the other side. Now, before you get to that, you know what to do when you see parentheses. The first thing you want to do is distribute. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times -2 is a -8, and that is still equal to y plus 3 squared. Now, solving for x, what are you going to get rid of first? get rid of what you're adding and subtracting, you end up with 4x is equal to y plus 3 squared plus 8. Now, how do we get rid of that 4? What you want to do is divide everything by 4. Everything, all the terms. These 4's cancel out. X is equal to, now notice that we're dividing all this by 1. Now, what's in front of this if nothing's there? It's a 1. So this is technically just a 1/4 because we can't reduce. Y plus 3 squared plus 2. And now, all that work just to realize, hey, is my a positive or negative? Notice here that it is positive, so that means we're going to go in the positive direction to the right. Alright, so same thing, try this one out, pause if you need to. Alright, so first what I like to do is it up or down, or is it left or right? Now, my y is getting squared and my x is not, so automatically I know that it is left or right. Now, if it's left or right, I need to know what my number in front is of my y. Now, to do that, I need to have my x by itself, so let's start with distributing. This stays exactly the same. You end up with a negative 4x plus 16. Make sure you get a plus there. Now, solving for x, we're going to minus 16 on both sides. I cannot combine these in any way, shape, or form, so I'm just going to rewrite it over. Finally, I'm going to divide everything by negative 4. Just like the one before, there's no number in front, so I'm going to put a 1. You cannot reduce 1/4, so I'm going to leave it as a negative 1/4. Y minus 8 squared. Negative 16 divided by negative 4 would be a positive 4. So, what number is in front of my y? It's a negative. That means it's going to go to the negative direction, which is the left. And that is it.